Welcome to Executive Access, created for motivated professionals. This is your home for real talk with executives about their career journeys, leadership practices, successes, and learnings along the way. I am your host, Jamie Tazi. Today, we will hear from Connor Marsden, Executive Vice President of Salesforce.com. Connor is a confident and bold leader who is always pushing himself and his team to think differently and act differently to achieve outsized results. All right, Connor Marsden, welcome to Executive Access. I am so thrilled that you're here. All right, so Connor Marsden is Salesforce.com's Executive Vice President of, get this, manufacturing, automotive, energy, retail, consumer goods, and Service Cloud. I swear, Connor, every time I see you on LinkedIn or speak to you, there's like another business added to your roles and responsibilities, which doesn't surprise me, but I think that's great. Congratulations.
Thanks, Jamie. It's great to be here. It's great to see you. And yeah, that's a mouthful. And so we actually just recently shortened it to industrial, consumer, and energy, and then also the Service Cloud. So it went from like 6 things to 4 things. We're trying to, we're constantly trying to innovate here at Salesforce.
That's great. I was wondering what you put on your business card. But I'm just going to say, if anybody needs help at Salesforce.com for anything, just call Connor. I think that's a good way to look at it. But so you've been at Salesforce for 9 years now. Prior to that, you were at Microsoft for 10 years. To me, you just have business application, sales leader, go-to-market leader in your blood. Is that fair to say?
It is literally my passion. Yeah, I've always been a biz apps person. Started off ERP. Now on the CRM in the front office, it's kind of been my lifelong work. Yeah.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Well, before we get into all of that, because I have a ton of questions about your leadership and your career development, I have to ask the question, because a few years ago, you picked up playing polo, right? Which is not the everyday thing that I see people doing. So tell us a little bit about that.
I'd never ridden a horse before, Jamie. Like, I mean, not like ridden a horse. Like I'd done the trail ride, where you're walking down the path, but never really ridden before. Picked it up. And, I lived in a golf course community. I had a golf membership and I'd go out and play the 4 or 5 hour rounds. And I constantly checking my phone. Like it wasn't very relaxing for me. And then I found the sport of polo. I was horrible at first, didn't know how to ride, didn't know how to play. But like when I was doing it, I was 100% focused on, the sport. And that became very addicting. Just the 1 hour brief respite from constantly thinking about work and deals and prospects and marketing to just focus on what was at hand. And so I've been doing it now for like 4 or 5 years, and it's been an absolute blast.
Are you like heavily competing, or what does that look like? Because I can't imagine you without competing.
Yeah, no, we compete all the time. We play in front of crowds every Saturday night. About 1,000 to 2,000 people come to watch us play. And polo is the only sport where it's a pro-am. So there's professionals and there's amateurs always all playing, together at the same time. And so the matches can get, pretty chippy, pretty sporty. And yeah, it's really competitive. And so I really enjoy it a lot.
That's great. Well, leave it to you, Connor, to have never ridden a horse, and now you're like not just riding a horse, but having to do something competitively with, what is it, like a mallet or something? Like that's crazy. So
That's exactly right. Yeah. Yeah. I use a 53 and a 54-inch mallet. So
I have no idea what that means, but for our polo enthusiasts that are listening, I'm sure they do. So I was driving to the office today and reminiscing a bit because, do you realize we're celebrating our 20-year friendship? Do you realize that? Because in 2004 is when we met. So just a quick story about how we met, just for fun. So you were working for another company. I was at Microsoft, and you invited me on a sales call. We were going to do a joint sales call together. And I remember thinking, wow, this guy is so good and so confident and so amazing. And a little while later, our team had an opening at Microsoft, and you were interested, and I really was interested in you, and we were talking a lot about it. And I always let my team, weigh in on the interview choices. So I didn't want to steer them too much, but I knew that somehow you were going to earn the position and wow everybody. But just in case, I was going to be there to like steer it and make sure that you were hired at Microsoft. And literally the morning of the interviews, I went into labor with my first son, completely missed the interviews. And so the whole time I'm in the hospital, I kept thinking, oh my gosh, did they hire Connor? Did they pick Connor? I hope they did. So you and your time at Microsoft and Luca's birth are like forever linked in my mind. Do you remember that?
I do. I remember both the sales call and I remember the day of the interview. I mean, the day of the interview, you came in and I came into the office. I found out that you weren't going to be there. Like I was excited that you were in labor and the whole nine yards. And then I looked at the competition and like the competition, if you remember, was on the Exacta side or the smaller side of the ERP
That's
side.
right.
The 1,000-pound gorilla was Great Plains, and I was competing against other Great Plains people. And so I was like, I have no chance at this role. I didn't know any of the people who were interviewing me, and you weren't there, and I felt very fortunate to get that. But I remember being very nervous and just thinking, I have no chance of this, of this working out.
You're being way too humble, but that was a fun day. And then we got a chance to work together for a long time. So
I do
I
remember that
would
first sales meeting, Jamie. I do remember
you
it.
did
It was a federal contractor in Frederick, Maryland,
wow,
and
good
they're a
memory.
manufacturer. And what I remember about that meeting, they were literally a 5-minute drive from the office. And it was about 12 minutes before the meeting started, and I was having a printing issue, and I had to put together all the proposals. And it was like, there was just like, this is early days. This is, yeah, literally a long time ago. And so I just remember I had to get the proposal all stapled together. And I'm like, Jamie, I know we're not going to be late. I literally we need 7 minutes before, 5 minutes to drive there, 2 minutes to walk in. And you were very calm and collected in the whole nine yards. And you were like, this guy better not screw up
Now,
this
did
sales
I help you
call.
staple? Did I sit there and judge or did I help you?
Helpful. No.
Oh, good. That's how I wanted it to be. Well, this is actually a perfect segue. So, when I think about your leadership, Connor, and I'm so excited to have you on the first season of this podcast, you were one of the first people I thought about because your leadership to me is actually quite extraordinary. And there are some things, many things that you do so well, but a few things in particular I'm so curious about. And I know our listeners will be as well. And that story is perfect because the first one is your confidence. I mean, with so many leaders that I coach, confidence comes up over and over again as not an issue, but maybe an opportunity. And it would be early in career people all the way through CEOs, right? But my impression of you is that's never been a challenge for you. Just the way you walk into a room, the way you respectfully challenge, the way you just think and engage, it just exudes confidence. Probably even at that call, I hope that there was a little part of you that was like, oh, maybe I should have done this yesterday. But you were just calm and collected, and you're like, hey, we got this 7 minutes. So I'm just so curious, where does that confidence come from?
I think a lot about this, and because confidence is not like, you can't just say I'm going to be confident, right?
Right.
Because we have conversations. Hey, just go into the meeting and be confident, right? I think a couple things. As you ask the question that come top of mind. The first is like, you have to be comfortable being vulnerable. You have to be comfortable being wrong. You have to be comfortable that you may not get it right. And and it's not about being right all the time. It's about trying new things. And it's about knowing that if you try new things, things are going to get, better. And so when I go into a meeting, right, I'm always trying to figure out like new messaging, new ways to, position a solution or product, new ways to solve, a different, business challenge. And quite often I get it wrong, right? But you see the reaction, you see how people, and then you can quickly adapt to what they said. After the meeting, you can go and ask people questions like, hey, what did you think about that? What did you think about this? Did you like this? Did you not like this? And over time, if you kind of practice like being willing to be wrong, being willing to try new things, like that's going to give you confidence because like you've survived all these bad outcomes before, you're only getting better. And ideally, like, the more you put yourself out there, the more you realize how much you can stretch yourself. And I think that's going to bring more confidence to, your everyday, meetings and engagements that you have.
That's great. My dad used to say, just what's the worst thing that could happen? And when you really think about that, you're like, you know what, that worst thing that I'm worried about, like, I can handle that. You're saying that by doing and trying new things and being vulnerable, you're actually building up this reservoir of being able to handle anything. So is that where the confidence comes from, you think? Just, I know I'm going to be able to handle any outcome, good or bad?
The confidence comes from I'm willing to be wrong. You brought up polo at the beginning of this. You brought up polo at the beginning of this podcast, and so let's just go there for a second. I'd never ridden a horse before. I'm riding thoroughbred racehorses. You know what I mean? That actually are just like off track. That was one of my first horses that I learned to ride on. Charlie was his name. He was a great horse. And so imagine like you've never ridden a horse. I'm a pretty big guy. I'm 6'6". You know, I don't exactly look like a jockey. And when you're playing polo, you're really riding with one hand. So you don't have both hands on the stirrups and you're holding this mallet. Like there's a good chance you're going to fall off, right? There's a good chance that things aren't going to go well. There's a good chance you're going to look really bad to people who've been playing for a long time, like really bad, like embarrassingly bad. And so to have confidence, you have to be willing to put yourselves in these situations, these really uncomfortable situations that you may not look good. And to your point, like what's the worst that's going to happen? The worst that's going to happen is you're going to get better. You're going to get better because you're in this uncomfortable situation. You've made yourself vulnerable. You realize you may be a little out of your depth, but you're trying to work through it. And the more often early in your career that you put yourself in those situations, that's going to give you that confidence that you can tackle, that you can tackle anything. And so for me to learn polo, like I had to overcome the fear, like I may fall off the horse going 25 miles an hour, but the more I push myself, the harder I do it, the more certain, situations I put myself in, the faster I'm going to learn, the faster I'm going to get better. But with that comes a risk. And so I think about that and similarly from a business standpoint, it's like just put yourself in those uncomfortable situations. And, the more often you do so, the better off you're going to be.
That's excellent. And when I think about you earlier in career, where I was early in career as well, that confidence was amazing. Because it's like, you know what? Connor's just going to make it happen. And if he breaks a little glass along the way, who cares? I'm curious, as you grew in your career, you imagine have to think about how that confidence affects others, right? Did you ever think about how you monitor that or moderate confidence? Has that ever come up for you as you've grown in the executive ranks?
Yeah, that's probably one of the biggest areas of like learning as you grow from, let's say a 25 person team to, 75 to 100 person team to a 300 person team to 1,000+ person team is that, you know, early in your career when you're, first line manager or second line manager, like you're the person. You're like the person to make it all happen, to go in and close the big deal, to do the big pitch, that folks look to, that's right, like just go in there and get the deal closed. But as you get to a larger organization, like you can't necessarily always be the person. You can't always be the person to give the big pitch. And so you do a lot of encouraging, right? You try and build people up. You do a lot of reviews beforehand. You push people. You make sure they're in a position to succeed. And you really quickly realize like, God, you better have a bunch of similar killers around you that are able to deliver that message and have the confidence to get that done, because there's a heck of a lot more of that happening than me going in and delivering the big message, or speech. And that's been like a really interesting, like, just like journey, that I've been on from a career standpoint as things have progressed over the years.
That's great. I would imagine that as your team sees you doing the things you were describing, putting yourself out there, trying new things, it's creating a culture around you where you're wanting others around you to do that too and supporting them and encouraging them. And if they make mistakes, lifting them up a little bit too. So in other words, if they say, well, if Connor can try something new and make a mistake and, maybe not look so great in one situation, I can too. Was that part of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I try and do is, one of the natural things that I've seen, especially big companies, and I felt this at Microsoft, and you see this at Salesforce, and I'm sure this is, at the end of the day, everyone wants to be nice to each other, as we're getting ready and preparing for meetings, preparing for big, for big pitches. And what I really find is critical is that like, when I try and encourage in our teams is like, let's be critical of each other. Let's like really push each other. Let's just not accept the status quo. Let's let's constantly do revisions and push for a level of greatness that we didn't think was possible. So we closed a really big deal in Q1. Really proud about it. And we were creating a video, Jamie, like, a 4-minute video of like our vision for this customer. And the team sent me the video and they're like, this is amazing. And by the way, it was amazing, right? And I'm like, all right, let's just see if we can make it a little bit better. And so we had some feedback. And so I had the team do 14 different revisions of the video from that point where it was really in great shape. And then they sent it and they were like over the moon, like we finally have it. And I found one more thing that I wanted to improve on the video. And it was just to prove the point that things can always get better, right? Things can always improve, and not to, and at the end of the day, the end product, we closed the deal. The video was actually critical to the closing, but just to prove to the team, like if you really push yourself, early on in the prep and creating the content and driving, it's going to give you a higher degree of confidence. It's going to give you a higher chance to succeed, but you're also going to have your breakthroughs in your messaging. Like you're going to, through the work and the process and the grind, you're going to make those quick connections that you didn't make, earlier on in the process. And so it's like, how do you create this culture where people are constantly challenging each other in a respectful way with the end goal of just making it a better product? And the more people you can get with that mindset, that are, kind, empathetic people, you're going to end up with having, more peaks than trials from a business results standpoint.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm hearing so much growth mindset, Carol Dweck's growth mindset in what you're saying, which I'm super obsessed about. And holding the space of kind and empathetic, and we're going to challenge each other, and we're not going to get defensive when someone says we can do it a little bit better. That's a real art. And as you say this, it reminds me of another thing that I think of about your leadership, and that is boldness. Boldness. There are so many times when we work together that you did exactly that. Like we're like, yay, we're there. And you were like, actually, no, it's not good enough, or it's not as good as we can make it. Let's keep going. Or we would have a goal for our offsite and you would say, no, let's shoot for something bigger. Let's burn the boats. And I always remember thinking, man, that's such a great quality. And you were able to get the team sort of rallied around that. So, where, where is that paid off, or how have you thought about that with boldness? Because it seems to become so naturally to you.
I think that comes from like an inherent just curiosity that I have, right?
Yeah.
Of like, how do we do things just slightly different, right? Like, how do we take what's being done and make it a little bit, and make it a little bit better? Whether it's like a program or it's like, hey, we're gonna do a conference. I'll tell you one, at Microsoft, we were launching a product called Marketing Pilot, and so we had the sales side, we had the service side. We'd never have a marketing product before. Bob Stutz bought this company. I worked with Keyshawn back in the day, who is at Salesforce right now, and I work with him all the time. He's amazing. And so I had this whole slogan like, hey, let's get it with a side of fries. So you're going to get the meal, you're going to get the burger, you're going to get the Coke. Like, let's get a side of fries. And the side of fries was the marketing, was the marketing pitch. And I'm like, it'd be great for this messaging. By the way, I think it bombed. I don't think people really got it in the whole 9 yards. So this is one of the times that I failed. But I had the team go to McDonald's and get a bunch of small McDonald's French fries, and they passed it out into the entire crowd to like reinforce it. So once again, I don't know if it was a success. The product wasn't necessarily a success. I can tell you that from my from my time there. But it was like, let's just try something different. Like, how do you make something stick and get memorable and in a customer's mind? Like, how do you now, as I think about scale across 1,000 people, like, how do I create like a mantra, or how do I create a vision, or how do I give energy into our onto our sellers so they can do great work? Let me give you like one more example, Jamie.
Please.
We were talking about having a fast start here at Salesforce. Every company has some version of fast start that starts with like an enablement, a company kickoff, some regional meetings, the whole 9 yards. And I was like, gosh, what if a fast start meant we actually just go like and meet customers? Like, what if that's like the fast start? Like, really bold thinking, right? Really bold thinking.
Right.
And And so I said this to my communications team, my chief of staff, my sales strategy lead, and they're like, "Yeah, that's a great idea." And um, and we're like, "Well, let's just create a week of where everyone goes out and meets customers, the first week of the second month of the kickoff, because we did have to do all the company kickoff and all those other things." And we called it Catch a Customer. And this was, I mean, kind of a hokey name. And but the whole goal was we use a product called Slack. It's the best collaboration tool in the business. Jamie, I'm sure you may have an affinity to Teams, but I'm telling you, Slack is where it's at.
I'm more open to new ideas.
And so the whole premise was this, Jamie. It was get on site with your customer, post a picture with your customer, and then write like 2 or 3 sentences about like what you talked about and what you learned. Right. And it was like a simple idea. It was different. It was born on my frustration of like, how fast can we start the year to get in front of customers? And it took off like wildfire. It was amazing, Jamie. Like what you realize is that as an organization, and here's the learning that I had, is that we like to celebrate when like the end outcome, the deal that closed, the big win, the whole 9 yards. But think about like all the during the journey, all the wins you need to have to get to that ultimate signed deal, that incredible demo, that incredible presentation, that incredible discovery session, that incredible, shop floor a walkthrough that you did to understand, their plant processes. And so like I would get pictures of folks in hard hats, like in the back of cars. And it was like celebrating the journey, but everyone gets a chance to celebrate in the journey because everyone in sales is part of the journey at some point in time. And to have the opportunity to get recognized during it was like, was incredible. But it started from this really small idea that I shared with the team and they made it better. And then they came up with a phrase and then we decided to like codify it. And so in boldness is also like sharing it with and having, sharing ideas and having other smart people around you that can take the ideas and make it a little bit better.
Well, and what I love about that story is the simplicity of it, right? It's easy in big companies to get caught up in all the internal things that we have to do. And all of a sudden a quarter has gone in your year. And you're like, have we really spoken to customers? So this idea, like, it's all about the customers. Let's obsess over them for a second and the rest will come together in generating energy. Executive Access is brought to you by The Ideal Life. The Ideal Life offers a multimedia platform that is focused on cultivating a growth mindset. Here you'll find a supportive community, valuable content, and transformative coaching aimed at helping you live a more gratifying and joyful life. Ready to take the next step in your personal growth journey? Visit theideallife.com to explore their wealth of resources and join their vibrant, growing community today. I was literally talking to a couple of my clients recently about this concept of, expertise, I think, can be a real blocker to innovation, right? Or curiosity is really what you said. So the more expertise we get, the lower our curiosity tends to go. I've seen that a million times. I've done that. I've seen this movie before. Versus when you're early in career, maybe you don't have as much expertise, your curiosity has to be sky high because you're like, I really don't know what I'm doing. So how did you keep your curiosity as your expertise grew year after year? I mean, were you able to do that? Because in that, I think, is the key to a lot of things, particularly for senior leaders.
I think this can be a very humbling business, Jamie. I tell people all the time, like, and technology, and what we do from sales and technology, big company, Salesforce, we're the best at what we do. You can look really smart. It can make you look a lot smarter than you are. It can make you look a lot dumber than you are really fast. And what I realize is the pace of technology right now is going much faster than anyone's ability to actually, keep up. And the longer I've been in this business, the more I realize that I don't know, right? And that you really can't, you can't really rely on like what your expertise was 2 years ago, because that could be very antiquated, from that standpoint. And so like now more than ever, like I'm constantly questioning, like, do I have this right? Am I thinking about this in the the right way. Not afraid to share my, my point of view, but, really talking to people and being like, is this really the right, the right messaging? Is this really the right way to, you know, to, to be thinking about like AI, for example, and like the impacts of is this going to be a huge change? Is it going to be a small change? When's the change going to happen? How are customers going to adopt it? Um, and so that's like, this is a very like humbling business. And so I think like with expertise needs to come humility and,
Yes.
the willingness to know that you're wrong and to constantly ask people to question your, your beliefs. Because I think if you do that, you're going to be surprised with what comes back.
I think that's great. I imagine that our listeners are at all levels in their career, and you've given some great advice for early in career. And this one is a reminder. Let's continue learning. Let's continue questioning. Let's continue being humble as we build up our expertise because everything is changing and technology for sure. But I would argue many industries are getting disrupted, or even in the industry that may not be as disrupted as you think, there's still a way to do better every single day. So that's what I'm hearing from you. Great. And you talked a lot about things that are about exciting people, energizing people. You said it in the story about catch a winner or catch a customer. Sorry. Your customers are winners, by the way, for sure, but catch a customer. Is that something you deliberately do? You think about how do I generate energy with my team, or is that an outcome of how you lead?
I think if you're going to give energy to your teams, especially at scale, like you know, you have to be really deliberate in how you think about it. And so, so first and
Mhm.
foremost, like I am um I try to be very deliberate in how I'm an authentic communicator, right? And we've all seen various versions of communication from, executives of authentic versus non-authentic. We've all read it, we've all seen it,
Oh,
go
yes.
into to details, but I try and keep all my communications really, really authentic. Um, when I'm in my all hands call, I talk like I'm talking right now. Like I don't ever want to seem like I'm scripted or thinking through. I want it all to be, just very fluid with the team so they know exactly what I'm thinking at what time, et cetera. The third thing that I think about from a organization standpoint is um, it's really important. People like to be recognized and not recognized with awards, just like recognized in the moment. And so like at the end of the quarter, I ask my teams to put together a list of exceptional performance of whether it be like an SE who did an incredible demo, an AE who got a pilot closed, didn't have to be the biggest deal. And I just pick up the phone, I give them a call and I talk to them. Hey, what's going on? Congratulations on this, et cetera. And,
Nice.
people are really appreciative of that. And so it's a series of like deliberate ways of like thinking about how you create that energy with your team, create that energy um, with your direct sellers, to hopefully create a winning culture in your organization. So
Excellent. I love you describing authenticity because I think everybody wants to be that, but it's difficult to figure out like how you do that. And so what I'm hearing you say is you're talking to me, you're 100% yourself. I'm guessing that there's a lot of preparation that comes in. You're not just winging it like, oh, what am I going to talk to the team about today? You're thinking and preparing about it, and then but the way you're delivering it is, or am I making an assumption I should?
making an points in my I have the bullet points in my head of what I want to actually go and and say to them. And and then like I never want to sound scripted. And that's the
Yes.
key thing. Like I want them to realize like, yes, I've put thought and preparation into what I'm going to say, but how I'm going to communicate it, I want to communicate it. And I talk to my teams about this all the time, and how you write emails and how you put together presentations and how you pitch. It's how do you just speak like plain spoken English, right? Like how do you not talk
That's
about,
great.
how do you not write an email that says, hey, we feel like we can deliver fantastic ROI, over your 3-year journey by driving automation and just all these fancy words that people try to use to convey an idea. It's like, how do you get it down to like just something that's just plain spoken that people can understand, that people can relate to?
Such a great thing. I reflect on one time I was leading a CRM launch. I did a keynote and somebody put together the deck for me and all the slide notes and I was trying to memorize it. And I think I probably did okay, but they weren't my words. They weren't my ideas. And I think it came off not as good as it could have, right? Versus, okay, give me input. Like I want to make sure we get across the points the company wants me to get across. But what is my take on it? Why am I excited about it? Why do I think this thing is the most exciting thing? And conveying it in my own words. And that is a lesson to learn. Let people give you input, but do it your way, right? I think that's great, Connor.
I remember and I'd use this technique a lot to pull it out of people. And by the way, it's really hard, right? Because like we have our marketing and people listen to their marketing, they listen to other podcasts, and they're constantly surrounded with, kind of these buzzwords that they want to incorporate into their communication. And so oftentimes like people will say like, they'll make some statement that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, or it's not plain spoken enough. And I'll say, what is that? And I'll be like, what does that mean? What does that mean to you? Oh, it just simply means like, we think we can cut off 20% of, we can improve their contact center handle time by 20% by creating, AI generated replies. And I'm like, well, just say that. Just say like the simple statement. Like, don't feel like you need to, make this really convoluted statement up front. And so when I say like, well, what do you mean by that? They describe it like like a way you describe something to your mother or your father or to your grandparents. And I'm like, just say that. Just like say what just say what you mean, and people will understand.
That is such a that is such great advice. You know what's so funny about what you just said? I say a similar thing. I say it like my super smart mom, but she's not a technologist. Say it so she'll understand because she's super smart, but she's not a technologist. So say it that way, right? So I love that you just brought up your mom because I feel the same way. Awesome.
It's like sometimes people feel like they have to conform to a certain way of communication in the technology world, and they don't, right? You can explore, you can try new things, you can keep things simple. Because at the end of the day, all our customers care about is just, like what's the technology going to do to take cost out or drive revenue? It's like our business is literally that simple. We're going to take cost out by making it more efficient.
So good.
We drive revenue.
So good. So good, Connor. And I feel like there's going to be listeners on here that are nodding along and they're just like, exactly. And you're going to have some listeners that are like, I haven't really experienced that, or it's not my norm to experience that. Right. And I will just say, keep at it, keep being yourself, because I remember the time in my career when I let all of that go. I remember actually the presentation I gave where I just did it my way, and it was slightly nerdy, slightly, I don't know, silly, like, but me, right? And the reception was 10 times better than me trying to put on somebody else's communication or trying to do it like some other leader, right? So I think that's such great advice. Thank you for that. I would love to shift gears a little bit because one last thing that I could be here with you all day. There's so many things I want to peel in with your leadership, but one thing I've always admired about you is that you always know when it's time to make a change. And, when I think about you had this amazing career at Microsoft, you were doing so well, or even before that, when I said, hey, come to this other team. You were on this fast path to become a manager. The path was so clear in front of you. And I said, come over to this team, this new team called the CRM operating model, no direct reports. Like, we don't even know what we're doing yet. And you did it and made such an impact. And same thing, you had this great career in front of you at Microsoft, and yet you moved on, right? Because you saw a different way. And I think I'm so curious about, how do you know when it's time to buckle down because there's something in front of you? You just have to stay and learn, and when it's time to take a risk.
Yeah, it's a great question. So and I think a lot of credit to you, Jamie. And so, by the way, for the audience, Jamie's hired me, and I think in like 3 different times, like to like three different roles. She helped get me into Microsoft. She helped get me into my first sales manager role because she was the regional director for our business, and then she hired me into the CRM operating model role, which she's referring to. So first and foremost, who you work for is probably the most important decision that you're going to make in your career. And if you have an opportunity to work with Jamie Tazi and work for on 3 different occasions, like I was very blessed with that, with that opportunity. And so if you're
Thank
going to
you.
make a change, know who you're going to go to from a manager standpoint. That's one of the most important things. The second thing that I think about from a career standpoint, and like when it's time to make a change is, and I have this conversation a lot, with our teams, is that ultimately, like, you need to think about your career not around a linear, projection of like, manager to second line to third line to fourth line. You have to think of your career as like a series of experiences. And what are the experiences that you want to get to? And I learned this from you, Jamie, based on like what role you eventually want to get to, not the next role, but the role after
Mm.
that. And so when I was at Microsoft, I was a first line sales leader. It took me 3 interviews. I failed 3 times to get my first manager role. And so like I so it wasn't easy to get that job. And then you went over and created this operating model team. And I thought, that I think this cloud thing is going to take off. And I remember sharing with you, like, I just let my intentions know, hey, I'd love to do something on the cloud if this, becomes an option. And you offered me the director of CRM Online role, but it was moving from a manager role. I'd interviewed for 3 times and finally had gotten it, to going back to being an individual contributor role. But the good news is I'd done the manager role for a couple of years, so I got that experience. But now I got like marketing experience, customer success experience, sales excellence or sales strategy experience, as we call it here at Salesforce. I worked with the product teams, I worked with our field marketing teams, et cetera. And so now I had a much wider berth of experiences to pull from. And that was really like helpful in my career, but I always knew I wanted to go back to sales. And so then another moment hit me, like I could have continued at Microsoft, but Biz Apps was not a major priority at Microsoft. I don't think it still is a major priority at Microsoft. Salesforce was, and so that's why I decided to make the pitch in over in that. But it's really the experiences part that I really think an awfully lot about from a career standpoint when it's time to make a change.
Well, that's great, Connor. Well, thank you for the compliments. And I will say, from my perspective, one of my big mantras is surround yourself with people who are smarter than you and let them fly. And so, yes, if I only hired you 3 times, I would make it 5. Although maybe you could hire me next time. So it would be fun to work together at some time. Well, I think that's great. I think being fearless, being bold, about your career as much as you are your business is really important, and also just being thoughtful about when you know it's time to make a change.
Yeah, and one other thing, and like just to share, since we talked about vulnerability, like, when I was at Microsoft, I remember I tried to, I was managing a national sales team, a retail team, and a couple of other businesses. And I wanted to get into, I thought about getting into the main part of Microsoft, and I was interviewing for a role, and I didn't get that role. It was a second line manager, it was a STU director position. And I recognized that, like, at the end of the day, as much as I learned in Dynamics, as much as, Dynamics pushed me, I realized, like, at Microsoft, it wasn't given a lot of it wasn't given a lot of the same, what's the right word that I'm trying to think of? It really wasn't given the right respect on what we were learning compared to the platform side of the house. And so I recognized, like, gosh, if I want to advance my career, it's maybe time to make a move. And so sometimes you have to listen, like, gosh, are doors shutting down here at Microsoft? And is it time for me to open up new doors at a different organization? And at the end of the day, because, I hear people talk a lot around, like, gosh, it's not fair. Like, how do I get this? And sometimes you have to self-select yourself out to open up a new door to move on, versus constantly trying to bang down the door that's familiar to you, that's maybe not available. And that takes some courage to recognize that and have the confidence that you're going to be okay. Like, let's let's try something else. Let's go to a different organization, a different culture, and see if I can get back on to accelerating my career forward.
Well, you've certainly done that, Connor, accelerated your career, and I'm not surprised at all of the great success you have. So, congratulations on that. Well, I have one final question for you. And you've given a lot of great advice today, but if you could just give one piece of advice about being a leader, just one, the biggest thing, what would that be?
I think, God, this answer has really changed a lot over the years, Jamie. Like, before it'd be, you know, um, you know, uh, energize your folks, be engaged, be willing to roll up your sleeves with your, account executives so that they know that you're in the boat with them. I still think that's great advice for,
Yes.
for leaders. And this is really advice for like senior leaders is that you have to create space, for others in your team to shine and to share. And that at the end of the day, it's not about your ideas, it's about the team's ideas, and it's about getting the best idea from the collective, group. And so that means like you really have to check how you communicate. You have to check on how hard you lean in. You have to check how forceful you are with your opinions early on in a conversation, so that you give people the space to express themselves and to share their thoughts and really push the conversation forward in a positive way and make sure that you're getting contribution from the entire team. And so what's interesting is like what got you being that force of nature, that bold leader, that sharing your opinion, and what got you to the position that you're in maybe isn't going to be the same skills or qualities that are going to get you to the next level or, continue to drive outsized results from a team standpoint.
Excellent advice. Well, Connor, thank you so much for being with us today. You're a breath of fresh air, and I appreciate you so much.
Thanks, Jamie. This has been great.
Take care. Thank you for listening to today's episode. Please join us every Tuesday as we continue to bring you insider access to executive leadership.